So you're in GRC302, or hopefully you know that you're in GRC302, where we're going to talk about GenAI governance in action. We're going to show you some demos and some really cool features around how you can use generative AI to build and validate your cloud controls. So in today's hyper-competitive market, developers like Greg here on the screen, they're facing a really intense pressure, not really just to ship code faster, but to integrate cutting-edge technologies like GenAI into those applications. I think every customer I talk to, everyone's building a GenAI-powered chatbot. Everyone's trying to figure out how do we extract business value from this thing called generative AI. So there's always been this demand to ship things faster as developers, and that relentless pace has got even worse now that we have everyone trying to figure out how do we monopolize and use GenAI within our applications. And so when your CEO is asking you why your competitor launched their AI feature last week while yours is still under development, it's often tempting to take these shortcuts as developers when you're under that pressure to ship things. The issue is, as you take these shortcuts, they're going to lead to significant security vulnerabilities down the road. Now, the purpose of this slide is I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I'm actually from Vancouver, Canada. Spent a lot of time hiking in the Rockies. Spent a lot of time down in Seattle. If you go to the Pacific Northwest, you often find these hiking trails that are basically switchbacking around a mountain, right? You go down the trail and it switches back around and around. It's a way to get down or up a mountain without basically having to go up a really steep elevation really quickly. And those paths, those trails typically will have these signs that say no, basically shortcutting switchbacks on this trail are prohibited. The idea here is that folks want you to stay on that trail. They don't want you to basically disturb the ecosystem of the forest. And so what often will seem like, well, this could be a really harmless shortcut. I could just take that shortcut and it would make things easier. It's really tempting to kind of fall into that mindset, right? If you think about AWS and security, you might want to start using wildcard IAM permissions instead of least privileged, just because it's simpler, it's easier. Or maybe you're sharing AWS access keys amongst your team members just for convenience. Or you decide, you know what, we're going to push the security patches to the next sprint because we're really too busy trying to get this feature out the door. So all these little shortcuts they often will appear very innocent in isolation. We've all been there. I'm guilty of doing this. So either creating overly permissive security groups or using the same access credentials or across multiple environments or copying public code snippets without the proper security review, those thousands of things, it's death by 1,000 cuts. And like I said, I gave you some examples on the previous slide. Each of these shortcuts, they may save minutes, maybe even hours today, but they're like small cracks in the foundation. And they're going to compound over time, and they'll eventually lead to really significant security incidents or even potentially a failed audit. And that could take months to remediate. So a failed security audit, it's not just a technical issue, really, if you think about it. It's a business crisis that basically will ripple across the organization. There's going to be some immediate impact to this, and they can be quite severe, such as a mandatory freeze on releasing any new features to production, maybe an emergency budget allocation for remediation efforts, or countless hours spent in executive meetings and giving status updates. But the longer-term consequences of failing an audit are even greater. Lost revenue from delaying your product launches, your competitors gaining market advantage during that freeze, and engineering teams being pulled off of innovation projects for remediation. So what started as a small shortcut to meet some deadlines could easily end up creating a multi-month setback for the entire business, basically costing far more time and resources than doing it correctly from the start would have required. So the path to security remediation after a failed audit, it's not about implementing a heavy-handed security regime. It's about understanding the underlying pressures that led to those developers feeling like they had to take those shortcuts and building a more sustainable framework that enables both security and innovation. And so success here really requires a balanced approach that addresses the immediate risk while developing longer-term solutions. The typical remediation journey that we've seen will typically unfold across three critical phases. First, you have your immediate risk mitigation, those quick wins that demonstrate really measurable progress. Then the process of foundation building, creating security templates and guardrails, and we'll show some of this later in some demos. And then it's not just about the technology and the processes, it's also a cultural transformation. So recognizing and rewarding security-first mindsets. So the key to a successful remediation lies in making security an enabler rather than a blocker. And this is where generative AI, and we'll talk about this more, by leveraging GenAI, you can automate a lot of these compliance checks. You can generate secure configurations, and you can assist with your security analysis, and it can really help organizations transform from a potential security crisis into an opportunity to build more resilient and efficient development processes. So imagine a development environment for your developers where security and compliance are seamlessly woven into the fabric of innovation, not as barriers, but as accelerators of trusted delivery. So developers can focus on building groundbreaking features, while security guardrails automatically ensure compliance every step of the way. So the result is basically a true DevSecOps culture where security is a competitive advantage. It's not a hindrance. Innovation and compliance coexist naturally, and new projects inherit those security best practices by default. This is not an aspirational vision. This is not just an aspirational vision. It's achievable today with the right combination of tools, automated processes, and AI-enhanced security capabilities. So our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about our two personas, Greg and Suchita. Greg's pressure to innovate, and we'll talk about how Suchita comes and rescues the day later on. Suchita then will also talk about how do you implement a secure foundation for innovation, and I will do some demos at the end, leveraging GenAI technologies to help you do that. So meet Greg. He's a software development manager at any company, leads a small team of engineers, and like we were saying before, he's been tasked to get a GenAI app to market ASAP. So lots of pressure coming in from his executive team. Greg's challenges are that team's already facing a backlog of technical debt that just seems to get bigger and bigger after each sprint. The team's already resource constrained. We all know, the whole team knows security is important. We know it's important. And we plan to do a security review before we go to production. But as that launch date gets closer and closer, the team's realizing, oh my goodness, we've underestimated the amount of work here to remediate all these security findings. And so what does the team do? Well, we're kind of under the pressure of the ship, and we're going to have to make a calculated risk. So that basic security review by our team revealed multiple configuration issues. We've ranked those and risked those, so there's some that are critical, and we're going to address those right now before we hit prod. But the things that are medium and low, we're going to take on that risk right now because we have to ship this thing to production. And so some of the critical things we found, some of these might seem like rookie mistakes, but we see customers do this still all the time. Root access keys being in use, using IAM wildcard, like very permissive privileges, missing VPC endpoint protections, or security groups that are open, wide open, or CloudTrail logging completely disabled. So these were some of the things that Greg and his development team found. And we realized we need help. We don't know what we're doing. So we actually hired Suchita as our principal security engineer to come and help us. So she's actually been tasked to help any company raise the bar on their security posture. And we told her, you're here not to say no, but to say how. So I'm going to pass this off to Suchita. There you go.
Thank you, Greg. So I am the acting security engineer because clearly I'm a product manager for any company right now. And I'm just coming in and I realized that, as Greg mentioned, that security needs to be part of your culture. And that's where I want to start in any company. I want to start with setting up this framework, this culture where teams like Greg can look at security as an enabler, not something as an afterthought. So to do that, we would be implementing a secure foundation for innovation. And the first thing that I want to bring to the company, any company, is this model. It is from the Institute of Internal Auditors. And it puts together a framework of how organizations manage their risk. It talks about the stakeholders in an organization that are responsible for managing risk, as well as meeting business objectives. And there are three key stakeholders in this framework. The top one, which is not depicted over here, is the governing body. So the governing body is basically the C-suite, executives who define the vision, objective of the organization, as well as they define the risk appetite of the organization. So once that is done, most of the organization, at least in any company, we had the second stakeholder management, but we only had the first line of defense, which was the team that is building the products and services for the customers of the organization. Now, in this three models, what happens is, in addition to building the services, this line of defense also is responsible for making sure that these services are in compliance with frameworks and regulations and security regulations. And what helps them is the second line of defense, where security engineers like myself come in, and they work with the first line, with the developers and the SDMs and the engineering managers like Greg, to help define the guardrails, the security best practices that should be woven in to the development process at the time when they begin the process. So not as an afterthought, not something that they should be fixing after the build is done, but right as they're building it. So almost fixing those little cracks that Greg talked about. So that is my role, working with Greg, figuring out what are the best practices that needs to be implemented, and helping him implement it into the innovation workflow. The third line is also it's called internal audit, and this stakeholder is responsible for two things. One, they're responsible for ensuring that the guardrails, the security best practices that are in place, are working effectively. They want to have the information to confirm that, to validate that, but they also sometimes are responsible for going to external auditors and providing them evidence that these things are being taken care of in this organization. Or if there is an audit request, these are the stakeholders that put together a report on what is happening in the organization, what are the different audit logs that can be shared with the external auditors. So we want to set up this framework within any company where the governing body, the C-suite, the people who are making the vision and the mission of the organization, the teams that are building the product are working together with the security and risk stakeholders to make security a foundation of their development process. And again, helping them with the how and not saying no by moving everything to the beginning of the development process. So with that, once we've established this culture, and Greg and I have a very good working relationships, and we start looking at how do we do this. We've built the stakeholder, we've built the responsibilities. Now we go into AWS and see what are the different AWS services that can align to these three lines of defense and help me enable compliance and audit within AWS. And you could think of more services that fit in over here, but some of the services that we would be talking about today are on these slides, on this slide today. So services like Control Tower and Config that enables and allows you to create an environment where security guardrails are baked into the day one workflows. Systems Manager allows for remediation if there's something off. Security Hub gives you security findings, identify things when they're out of compliance, and Audit Manager and CloudTrail helps personas like Suchita, security managers, as well as compliance engineers, find when something is going wrong and giving the evidence of what is happening in the organization. But before we go there, Greg shared about some of the shortcuts that he took. And while we go there, I do want to take a step back and work with any company and stakeholders like Greg and the C-suite and talk about some of the common things that need to happen. How do we make sure that as new software, as new services are being rolled out in production, we have a clear line, a clear boundary to make sure that our AWS resources are protected from unintended access. And therefore, we need a guardrail around our AWS environment to make sure that our resources are being accessed by the right identities. And that is done through establishing a guardrail around your AWS environment. And why is it important? Why is it important for you to set a high-level, course-level guardrail and protect your AWS environment at the get-go? It is because when I speak to security professionals as a CloudTrail person, one thing that I hear commonly is they are resource constrained, they are skill constrained. And they cannot be in every meeting with Greg to figure out that the permissions that they're using, the access that they're providing to their resources are locked down. So this is what guardrails help them with. It helps them to implement compliance, security at scale, make sure to put some boundaries that they absolutely know is something that they cannot happen in this organization. For example, nobody should ever access my S3 buckets from external, network outside of my data perimeter. They can put those boundaries. They can meet compliance at scale. They can make sure that the data that is sitting in their AWS resources are protected. They can help customers and stakeholders like Greg to move faster, new services that they want to use, new capabilities that they want to build. They can go in knowing that the foundation is secure and they would not be opening up the organization to any kind of compliance or security risk. So that's why this is important. Now, after this, let's see what does it take to set up the secure perimeter inside AWS. And that's how you do it with data perimeters. You create a data perimeter around your AWS environment, and it is really a set of permissions, guardrails in your AWS environments that does three things. It says only the right expected user identities should be able to access your expected resources through expected networks. So three big data parameters that protects your data. And it starts with you defining what those trust boundaries are. So who are these trusted identities? Typically, these are identities within your AWS account, IAM entities within your AWS account or within your AWS organization, as well as AWS service principals that are taking action on your behalf on your AWS resources. So anyone other than that, you can say you do not want them to be able to access your resources, not trusted versus trusted. Similarly, next, resource. You want your users to only be able to access resources that you trust. If Greg is building an AI application, you want to make sure that the data that he is building the AI application on is coming from and is hosted in a trusted resource. And that's what the resource perimeter can do. And then similarly, network. What is the IP landscape of your organization? Anything coming outside of it is something that you probably do not want to get in. So you do that, you define the objective of your controls, and then you apply it in your AWS organization. And once you are done with that, you have now built that boundary around your AWS resources to stay always on. And you do it in a way that anytime you configure a new account, anytime you push a new application out, these boundaries are there. So there are three parameters, as I said. Identity, it'll help you reason who is making the request. It'll help you ensure that your customer data or your sensitive data is always protected and never accidentally or unintentionally it is exposed to unauthorized users. You can say things like, my S3 bucket should never be accessed by external entities. That could happen if you do not configure the access properly, but with boundaries, that's where you can stop it. This can also ensure that your employees are not able to bring in their IAM credentials into your data perimeter to access your resources. So you can stop that. Similarly, the resource data perimeter would help you reason about what is that particular user trying to access. For example, it can, as I said, it can say Greg's team cannot access data outside of my trusted resources because that is the data he needs to build his AI application on. That is the data that the model should be trained on. And then finally, network, as I said, where is the request coming from? So you need to know who is taking the action, identity, and blocking people who are not the right identity. You need to know what are they taking the action on and whether that is a trusted resource or not. And you want to be able to know where is the resource coming from. And you need to have the ability to say whenever the three things don't match, whenever there's an external IAM credential coming into your data perimeter, you have to have the ability to see what's going on over there. So you set this data parameter, you apply it in a way that as a new account comes in, it's already there, it's there in day 0. But you also make sure that you are using your IAM conditions and IAM policies to further restrict access to meet the principle of least privilege. So while data parameter is the coarse-grained filter, you cannot forget about the IAM policies and the fine-grained principle to make sure your resources are safe. So you do that by setting up fine-grained access controls with IAM conditions, which gives you start with the broader IAM condition, and then you go down and down and down, and you say, this should only happen if this condition is true. This should only happen if the IAM entity is originating from this particular principal ID. Or this should only happen when it's tagged a certain way. So you go down and down, starting with the broader IAM policy to a very restricted policy, only enough to give that particular entity enough permission to do the job that it is required to do. So you bring it down to the least privilege principle. So once that is done, so now Greg understands this. He knows that this needs to be done. It needs to be part of the development process. We will now look at some of these services that Greg and I would work together and have it in place so that when the next time Greg is pushing something out, these services can help him build a secure foundation. And these services can help Suchita, the security professional, identify when there's variance in something, when there's something odd that is happening, and she can go in and figure out what's going on. We won't be talking about all of these services, given the time. We'll focus on AWS Control Tower, AWS Config, and AWS CloudTrail. And Greg would be doing a demo using these services to achieve the needs that we are talking about right now and making sure that the application is secure from the get-go. OK. So the first thing we'll talk about is Control Tower. So what is Control Tower? Control Tower is an AWS service that provides you a single pane of glass to manage your AWS accounts in AWS organization. It's very essential when you think about it from security and compliance standards. You can define and implement consistent security and compliance standards, and then make sure that every new account that is coming in your AWS organization meets those configurations. So it minimizes the proliferation of configuration and having multiple stakeholders managing these very, very detailed and important guardrails. It comes with automated account provisioning. You can deploy new accounts very, very quickly, and you can be sure that all of the policies are attached to those accounts. So again, security as the best practice in the get-go instead of as a secondary thought. And then you can enable, using Control Tower, you can enable service as config, AWS Config, Security Hub, CloudTrail to make sure you have the compliance checks. You're monitoring if something is deviating or a resource is being non-compliant, and you have all of the information to react to. So everything can be established through Control Tower. It exists. I'm sure you're using it. But what Greg would show you is how you can now use AI to build something like that with minimal knowledge. When I see the demo, that's what I saw. It's like I don't even need to know what Control Tower is doing or what kind of policies they have. But very quickly, before going down, Control Tower has multiple libraries that you can enable. There's detective controls. They basically implements detective controls through SCP and Security Hub and Config. It identifies how your resources are against a particular compliance, and if there is a movement, it will alert you. Preventive control is via service control policy, which makes sure that you have controls in place to protect the access to your data. And then proactive controls is something that you can put the mandatory controls to make sure that certain things that you know should not happen in your AWS environment would not happen. So access to, as I said, external credentials is something that you can stop before it happens. So that's, OK. So that is Control Tower, helping you at a scale put together security guardrails and then implement it across all of your accounts in your AWS organization. I mentioned that Control Tower enables certain services or provisions certain services that help you meet the needs. So what Control Tower did so far, if Greg is using it, it enabled him to build compliance and security as part of implementation, as part of initiating a development process. What Control Tower can also do is enable config, which would tell Greg, if a resource is out of compliance, AWS Config is a service that will track all of your resources. It'll track the status of that resource, and when a configuration changes, and if it impacts a rule that defines whether it's a compliant resource or not, it will alert you. So you can go in and you can first remediate the resource that is out of compliance. Somebody opened the S3 to public, it'll tell you, and then you can go and you can change that, and then you can also come back to something like CloudTrail to see who made that change, so that you can lock down the permissions. They are not allowed to do that in case they do it. Config also comes with compliance packs, and this is really a group of rules that is aligned to frameworks such as HIPAA, PCI, and NIST, and you can take that compliance pack and enable it in an organization if that is what you need to be compliant to, and it will automatically start looking at your resources and match to the config rules. And if any resource is out of compliance for that particular framework, it will alert you. So you can enable, as you're building, as you're setting up your accounts, you can enable AWS Config, and it'll start doing that controls and making sure that your resources are always compliant. Now comes the AWS independent assurance. What happens when something goes wrong? What happens when an external auditor comes to security engineer or compliance engineer and says, show me the evidence that this user did this, or show me an evidence that this user did not bring in an external IAM credential to your AWS account? That's where CloudTrail comes into picture. CloudTrail will capture all API activity, basically answering the question who did what and when, and whether the action was successful or not, and gives this information to customers to determine two things. One, if a malicious action has happened, who took the action, how long did the person take the action, what all resources did the person touch. But even with a recent launch, you can now tell whether the person was from your data parameter or outside of data parameter. So we would look into that. It not only answers who did what and when, it can now also answer where did the API call originate from, and whether you expect it to originate from there or not. So that's what CloudTrail is. In most customers, CloudTrail is enabled as a trail form where customers collect all of those logs, and then they push it to an S3 bucket that they own. And if Suchita has a question, then it's on her to make sure that all of that log is searchable, analyzable. So she takes the work of making sure that the data is pushed out somewhere where she can analyze it. So that does take time, that does take effort, that does require skill. In a company like any company where right now Suchita is the only person, or the security team is really, really small, what helps is having something that is completely out of the box and can get me started as soon as I find an issue. So that's where CloudTrail Lake comes in. CloudTrail Lake has multiple capabilities that help Suchita simplify her analysis of CloudTrail logs, simplify to the reporting that she needs to do on who did what and where. What CloudTrail Lake is, it is a managed solution where I can enable what is it that I want to capture. I want to capture control plane API activity, accesses to the data, so our data plane activity, or I want to be able to see where the API call is coming from. I can do that. I can enable that capturing. I can enrich the CloudTrail events. So if my organization or Greg's organization follows a resource tagging strategy, say all of the resources related to this particular AI application need to be tagged a certain way, because that is how I do my reporting for activities. I can insert those resource tags. I can enrich CloudTrail events or API logs with resource tag information that helps you group events into business context. I can also add, we talked about the global condition keys in the IAM policies, which allows me to fine tune and really focus on the condition that needs to be met for an API call to be authorized. I can now add that information into CloudTrail event. So when I need to figure out what happened, I not only have who did what and where it originated from, I also have business context of my tagging strategy. I have business context of the IAM global condition keys that I use to fine-tune my access to resources. And then you can store and aggregate your logs in one place. You log it and forget it as and when you need to access this data, you can come and visualize and analyze this data right within CloudTrail Lake. We talked about that. We would be talking about how you can use AI, so you don't really need to understand the schema of the CloudTrail event. How do we depict user identity, or where do tags sit in the JSON that we capture for each and every API event? You can just come in and ask a question, and it'll give you a query. You can run a query, and then you can get an answer on that. So it really simplifies and reduces the time it takes for someone like Suchita to first identification of an issue to get down to the root cause analysis if CloudTrail logs is where the root cause analysis lives. So reduces that, and I don't need to be well-versed with SQL. I don't need to be well-versed with reading tables. I can get a simple summarization of the results and go back to Greg and just say that, Greg, you know what, this person, this resource that is tagged this way has a particular kind of API activity it should not have. So fix that, instead of going through lines and lines of data to get to the same thing. Very quickly, what's new in CloudTrail? I probably will not get into all of these, but two things that are relevant for the conversation today, three things actually. First is in the capturing. I mentioned there was a recent launch 2-3 months ago, which we are calling network activity event. And that is specifically to answer the question around the data perimeter, who from outside of your data perimeter is trying to access your data or resources within your perimeter, or from inside your perimeter accessing resources out of your. So this is a net new visibility that network VPC endpoint owners now get. So if somebody is trying to access, let's say somebody is trying to access the CloudTrail trail from outside your data perimeter and they're getting access denied, while that's good, your VPC policies are working, but you still want to know that somebody is trying to penetrate or poke holes in your data parameter. So that's something, the new visibility that is available through CloudTrail. Enhanced event filtering is cost related, but you have the ability to go in and say, I don't want to log this type of events. So I really trust AWS service principles, let's say. I don't want to have events coming from that particular principle. You can exclude that. You can say, I do not care about a particular type of event, particular name of event. You can go in and you can have those fine-grained controls. The second one is enrichment. I talked about how you can include tags and IAM global condition keys into your CloudTrail events. This is something that we launched like a month ago, I think, but it helps you insert business context into your event. So when you have issue to identify or issue to root cause, it always comes from a context. You're answering a question, and now that context in certain ways can be included within the event. You don't have to manage it separately. And then AI-powered summarization and natural language queries, dashboards, visualizations can help you very quickly go from something went wrong to figuring out why it went wrong or who did this thing wrong. You can quickly put together reports and share those reports with your stakeholders. Okay, we talked about this. This is basically the feature, tag your resources and track activity for them. IAM global condition keys, resource tags can be inserted into CloudTrail events, and then you can use that information to categorize CloudTrail logs. And we'll show this today in the demo. And then I talked about this, so I won't go into details, but this is network activity events, and it monitors API activity, AWS API activities that is passing through your VPC endpoints, access denied or access passed. You can get all that visibility. So if somebody is trying to poke holes in your data parameter, you can see that. If you are setting up your data parameter and you want to fine-tune your VPC policies as you're doing that, you can use this information to basically do that. And we are supporting we support multiple Amazon's AWS services right now. These are just some of the list, but the list is much larger. If you do want to use it, it's available in our documentation. So that's about it. I would hand it over to Greg to actually show everything in a demo.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Suchita. All right. This is where the GenAI comes into the talk. I know we've kind of talked about it a little bit. I want to see, by a show of hands, who has used the QCLI recently? like less than 1%. Okay, awesome. I'm going to knock your socks off, hopefully. So I'll talk a little bit what I'm going to show, and then we'll do these 3 demos here. The first 2, I think, are about 5-6 minutes, and the other one's about 2.5. So the QCLI is something we just launched a few weeks ago, I think a few months ago. And it's in addition to what we've had for some time, which is the AWS Q in the console, as well as our IDE plugins into things like JetBrains, Visual Studio Code, that sort of thing. So the CLI is a really, really cool tool, and I can't stress enough, you have to go try this to actually believe it. It's amazing. So basically what the Q Developer CLI is, it's a command line tool that you install. It can help you write code, it can help you run tests, create and run bash commands. It can access AWS APIs and resources. It can help debug issues. It can deploy code, and you can connect to MCP servers. So it can do a lot. It does it all through command line. There's also this, it has agentic commands, so it's a true agentic experience. So it will basically utilize a wide range of development tools within your environment. It'll run commands for you in the terminal. It can read and write basically content to the file system. It'll actually conduct troubleshooting and other AWS-related actions. And you can say, you know what, I'm going to trust you on this specific set of actions, or I want to validate every single step you're going to take. So you can basically acknowledge everything it does, or you can say, you know what, I trust you, go nuts. So it's really up to you what you want to do there. So the first 2 demos will show how we use the QCLI to basically accelerate the implementation of Control Tower and Config, and those controls and policies that Suchia talked about. And then I will demo some AI capabilities within CloudTrail. So some of the things you could use the CLI for in Control Tower is really the automation of basically your baselines, right? Like Control Tower has something called Account Factory. Under the hood, it's Service Catalog, talking to CloudFormation, but it's a way for you to customize an account. So not just create the account, but go ahead and customize a baseline, have that secure baseline for your organization. You could also use the CLI to help you author SCP policies, or converting just requirements into specific Control Tower configurations. So this is what the first demo will be about, is how do we use QCLI and generative AI to basically accelerate the baselining of accounts. So I'm going to switch to my demo laptop. Okay, so this is a pre-recorded demo here. I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and I'll talk through this. So I've already installed the CLI. Hopefully you guys can see this okay. And so I do Q chat. So now I'm in the Q chat experience, the Q developer CLI experience. And I'm going to start writing some stuff about Control Tower. So I'm using AWS Control Tower. I would like to start using the Account Factory capability basically within Control Tower to help basically baseline my accounts, right? We want that secure baseline, that secure foundation for these accounts before we hand them over to these application development teams. So to start, I'll give it as much context as you can give. The more requirements you can give QCLI, the better the outcome or the better the output. So I'm going to explain to start, I would like to create an appropriate account customization baseline for a 3-tier web application. And I'm actually being pretty open-ended about this. So I'm saying, can you please suggest a baseline? What would you recommend? Not saying necessarily you should go do this, put it in production right away. There has to be a human in the loop to do some validation, but I'm keeping it pretty open-ended. Does some thinking, says I'd be happy to help you. So it's basically highlighting a few things it thinks I should do based off my very, very loose requirements. I'll pause here just for a second so you can actually read this. So it's suggesting for my 3-tier web app baseline, I should do the following things under networking. I won't read them all, but under the networking configuration, I should have those security controls and some service-specific configurations. Just hit play again, and we'll keep going. So it's doing some more thinking. I did speed up most of the video. Sometimes it will take a little bit of time. This should, I guess, go to the next step pretty shortly here. We'll just give it a moment. It's funny, with GenAI, we've gone back to the 90s where the internet, you had to wait for things to basically show up on the screen. Now we're used to the sub-second or millisecond latency, and now GenAI has brought second latency back. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward this because Okay, so it has now basically started creating the CloudFormation for my baseline. So if we go into here, we're actually going to see some with CloudTrail. And I'm actually catching an error here. Like, again, this is not perfect. CloudTrail is already enabled by Control Tower. There's no reason to basically configure CloudTrail if Control Tower has already enabled it. So I'm checking the work, right? I'm the human in the loop. And I'm looking at this like, that doesn't quite make sense. If this actually got deployed, it would throw an error because CloudTrail is already configured. So I'm asking, are you sure you want to do this? And he's like, oh, you're absolutely right. Control Tower already does this. So again, I just want to highlight, this is not perfect. Generative AI is non-deterministic, and it's not always going to have the right answers. You need to validate the work that it's outputting, but it can be an accelerant to the work that you have to do. So I basically have asked it to remove it, so it's not going to do anything around CloudTrail because we don't have to worry about it. It's already enabled. And I'm asking it, can you now please summarize? I'll move the controls over here. Can you please summarize what you're going to do? So again, my 3-tier web app, it says we're going to create multi-account architecture, or multi-AZ. Here's the VPC and the CIDR blocks, and we're going to do these specific things around guard duty, config S3 bucket, and some other stuff. So I respond back to this in the command line. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and start doing this. So I've asked it to create the CloudFormation template, does some thinking, and now it creates my CloudFormation template. We'll just wait a moment here again. Depending on what you're asking it to do, sometimes it takes up to a minute, sometimes it's 5 seconds, sometimes it's 1 second. It really depends on the complexity. So it's created my YAML file. I have my CloudFormation baseline. It's reiterating what is in there. And it's saying to use this template, I actually should hit pause there. It said you can go ahead and deploy this yourself, and here's the steps, or it can actually help me deploy that CloudFormation as well. It can not only build the CloudFormation, it can go deploy it. I'm going to do it through the console. So in Control Tower, uses Service Catalog for this baseline. I'm not sure if you can fully see the screen here, but in Service Catalog, you set up a new product. So I'm going to call this Account Factory 3-tier web app. We had to put an owner. Well, we have to upload the template. Put an owner and a version on this. So I'm going to version it 1.0.0.0, and then I'll put myself as the owner of this template. So this is my baseline. That's the 300 plus line of CloudFormation that I didn't have to write. And now that's set up as a product. And so when I go to Control Tower, I can go ahead and actually apply this baseline to my account, any new account or any existing account under the management of Control Tower. I'm just going here to get my account ID, which I'll need. So I'm not going to create a new account in this situation. I'm going to go to one of my sandbox accounts. I'll just pause here just for a second. So this is, I had a bunch of accounts here. I'm in my sandbox account. Just as an example, I'm going to go ahead and apply this baseline. So you can see the blueprint. There's no blueprint information there. That means there's no baseline applied to it. Under Account Factory, I put in my account ID where I'm hosting these baseline configurations, the CloudFormation templates. I click Validate. And then you can see I have a series of products. And there's my 3-tier web app product that I just created through the QCLI. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Update Account. Through the magic of video editing, it worked instantly, and you can see that baseline's being applied, right? So I have that blueprint that I've created that I didn't have to code applied to my account. And I'm going to go switch to that account and just show you some of the resources it created. So this is a really simple example of how you can use generative AI to get started building these baselines, right? Before, you would have to write 300, 400, 500 lines of CloudFormation, and it's a lot of work, right? Especially if you haven't done it before. This will, again, don't trust this thing just to do all the work for you. You need to actually validate that this stuff works, but it can accelerate what you need to do. I'll just fast forward a bit here. So now I'm gone into that account. You can basically see those AZs. So this is just proof that, hey, that CloudFormation template actually got deployed, properly baselined the account, and created the network architecture that I need for my 3-tier web app. So the next thing that we're going to talk about, Suchita talked about this, is config rules and conformance packs. So you have this ability to create a custom config rule. There's some Lambda and usually SSM automation documents in there as well for remediation. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use the Q developer CLI to accelerate the creation of these detective controls within the platform. So we'll go back to my second demo. I'll just bring that up here. We'll get started on this one. All right, so again, we're going into the queue chat, new experience. So now I'm telling I would like to use AWS Config to do some, basically enforce some tagging. So Chia talked about the importance of tagging and how you can enrich CloudTrail with it. So I'm telling you, I'd like to use AWS Config to detect if my AWS resources, I'm just saying EC2 and EBS, to provide some guidelines, are properly being tagged. And in my organization, any company, what I need are 3 tags that are critical for the organization: cost center, the project name, and then the owner. So again, I'm giving it context, and it's going to then start to talk with me, and then we'll basically build a solution together. And what I would like to do is not just notify our organization that something's not compliant. I actually want to take a remediation action. And I'm going to be really aggressive. I just want to delete the resource. You wouldn't normally do this in production. You'd probably have a more gradual, okay, fix this in the next week. If you don't, we're going to delete it. For me, and just to keep this example simple, as soon as we see something that's not compliant, like an EBS volume that's not tagged, we're just deleting it right away. So I've given my requirements to Q CLI, and it says, yep, I'm going to help you create a config rule, a remediation action. I'll create all the necessary permissions. So it's basically going through there, checking to make sure AWS config is set up. And now it's basically talking about how it's going to create a config rule and the permissions I need to basically implement this solution that I described to the Q developer CLI. Again, this is an example where you can say, I want to always trust this type of tool or command that the CLI is using, or you can always basically validate each step. So it's going through and creating the IAM policy that's needed to make this work, as well as the rule. So that's the config rule that's going to be used to check for those required tags. And then it's going to create a remediation automation document. I'll let it think again. I'll keep thinking. And it's still thinking. There we go. And then it's create some setup instructions to create a markdown, basically to tell me how I can actually go and deploy this, and the type of files it's created, and then how it's going to work. And then this is actually important too. I'm going to pause this here just for a second so you can read this. I want to be really aggressive. I want you to delete the resource right away. It's actually telling me I'm not quite sure about that. You may want to add some notifications or having a manual approval process. So I've tested this demo a few times. I've gone through several iterations, and each time it's told me, hey, that seems really aggressive. Are you sure you want to delete everything? We're going to still say yes, but I just want to point out, it's not simply taking your instructions. It'll actually reason with you and say, you know what? We're not quite sure. Maybe you should consider this other alternative. So it's not just about taking your instructions and implementing them. It can actually maybe sometimes provide you insight into something you didn't realize. So I'm going to say, no, go ahead, create the script. We're going to go deploy this. So I want not only for it to create the files, I don't even want to have to deploy this. So I'm going to ask it to create a bash script, and it will go ahead and deploy it for me. So it's doing more thinking. It's going to go ahead and create the bash script, and then it will basically do the deployment, which will only take a few seconds, and then I'll go show you in config that this is actually working. All right, so now it's created the script. The script will do everything it needs to do to deploy this. I'm saying go ahead, make it executable. Go ahead and hit deploy. We'll give it another moment here. So now it's created the script. It's telling you basically how to use it. And I'm saying, okay, I'm going to just, I want to call it here, and it will actually monitor the progress of that script. So if it actually failed, if you execute it within the context of this queue chat, and it fails, it'll actually look at the error and try and fix it automatically for you. So it's just going through, and it's creating the script, and then doing the deployment. All right, it's telling me I don't want to actually deploy this because it's going to delete things potentially, and it's basically asking me to go ahead and execute the deployment. So that's what I'm doing right now. It's doing all the checks. Again, I've sped this up a little bit, but successfully basically deployed the solution that I only started to think up basically a few minutes ago as I was interacting with this. So the script's being deployed successfully. It's just summarizing what it did, and then we'll go into the console and I'll show you. And we have one more demo after this for about 2 minutes. We'll get you out of here right on time. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go into the console now. Let's see if I can there we go. So I have 2 volumes in here. These are 2 EBS volumes. One you can see has the cost center of the project and the owner tags. The one does not have those tags. So one of these is compliant, the other's not. You can see the remediation actions being queued up by config. It's now executed successfully. If I refresh, the volume's disappeared because it's automatically deleted that volume. So again, our recommendation is not necessarily to use the GenAI tooling here just to do all the work and not check it. You need to be involved in this, but it's going to it'll really help you accelerate your productivity. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. And this is the last one, a short demo, about 2 minutes here. I'm going to basically walk through the AI-powered natural language generation as well as the summarization and how you set this up in the first place. So here we go on demo 3. All right, so the first thing you do, like Suchiya said, typically most people think of CloudTrail on trails. You need to set what's called an event data store for Lake to work. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new event data store. I'll just give it a name. There's some pricing options. I won't go and explain that. That's not relevant to this session. But we'll call it the demo data store. Click next. And this is where Suchita was talking about different types of events. So management events are the things like if you create a volume or you delete an EC2 instance, where data events might be something you're doing with data within like an S3 bucket. And then you also have network activity events. So you can specify which type of events you want in Lake. So I said the management and the data events. And then when you do select data events, you can actually go and specify, okay, what type of data? So is it DynamoDB? Is it S3? So you can actually have control over what you filter down to. This is the important part that Suchita was talking about, is the event enrichment. So I can actually go in here and enrich my events with the tags that are really important to my organization, the project, cost center, and owner. So that's what I'm doing here. And then again, I go and create my event data store. And these are the 2 AI-powered capabilities I'll show you in just a second here once we start querying or writing queries against Lake. So the first query I'm going to go against Lake is show me all the EBS volumes. Sorry, Amazon EC2 EBS volumes created today. Really simple query because we just created some in the previous demo. And I don't have to know SQL. I could be an auditor that knows nothing about SQL and it's taking my natural language expression and basically turning that into a SQL statement that works basically against the CloudTrail data. So you can see here, I'll pause it here a second. And you can see if I just scroll it back there, it's basically generated all that SQL just from a really simple question I've asked it. So you don't have to learn the syntax to actually be able to query and get insight into this data. And then the other thing that Suchita talked about that is also AI powered is the ability to do summarization. So once we run this query, we have 2 volumes there, again from the previous demo. We can click, this is in preview right now, but we can click the summarize results section down there. And what that's going to do, it's going to look at those 2 CloudTrail events and summarize basically in plain language what do those results mean. And so you can see basically it's saying, okay, today 2 EC2 EBS volumes were created. They both had a size of 100 gigs. They're non-encrypted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So imagine giving this like 100 lines of CloudTrail events and having it summarize, okay, what's happened here? So between the ability to use AI to do summarization as well as natural language query generation, it makes it incredibly simple to get insight into your CloudTrail data. And then if you want to extend this further, I'll go back up to the query and we could, if we wanted to, we could also say, well, I want some tag information basically in that initial result set. So you can then refine that query, you can ask for more things. So not only show me all the EBS volumes created today, but please include the following tag key values in my query. As I type that, it will generate the query again. And the end result is basically an updated query. If we, you can, there on line 2, it's not trivial necessarily sometimes to extract this information, the tagging information here, but with the query generation, it makes it very, very simple. All right, let's wrap this up. That was the last demo. So just basically in summary, our advice here is start small, think big, scale really fast. Transform security and compliance, and Suchia talked a lot about this, from being a bottleneck to an enabler. Use these tools to make security and compliance just part of the development process. Leverage the Q developer CLI to accelerate securing your foundation. You saw on the screen, it's incredibly simple to get started. Remember, it's not going to do your job for you. You still need to be the human in the loop and actually validate this, but it's going to make you, it'll be basically like a superpower for you. You're going to be more efficient. You'll be able to get more done with that. Again, GenAI is augmenting your team's capabilities and basically empowers them to work smarter and not harder. So I think with that, in about 3 minutes left, we'll wrap this up. Thank you for attending the session this afternoon. Please do the survey. And we can take questions up front.